Hello everyone, Mrs. McClelland here, and I'm going to talk to you about Augustus, who's considered Rome's very first emperor, and we're going to look at what the Pax Romana is, which is known as Roman peace. This is a time period in Rome's history where their military is strong enough to keep outside invaders from causing problems and disrupting trade, and there isn't a lot of civil war. Like there isn't a lot of infighting. So because the focus is not protection from war and fighting, the focus is on daily life and finding new ways to improve daily life, like the development of concrete and running water, and again, the strengthening of trade. And so people's lives are starting to really improve during the Roman peace, Pax Romana. We're really going to also focus on that transition from republic to empire. And in order to do that, we first have to look at Caesar, who was a dictator. Now, under the Roman Republic, they have always had room for a dictator. In the time of war, they would elect a dictator to, really streamline power and have just one guy make the decisions and make them fast, because, that's how it works in war. You can't have too much red tape. But it was thought that once you had a dictator that they stepped down after 6 months. And Caesar was not someone who stepped down after 6 months. He was someone who had a strong military. And that's what dictators do. They come in with their strong military, they take over, and he really didn't show any signs of giving up his power. And a matter of fact, it looked like he was grooming his adopted son, Octavian, for to take over after him. And the Senate did not like the direction this is going. They wanted to, they wanted to preserve the republic. And so they're like, in order to preserve it, we have to get rid of this dictator so that we can go back to running the Senate and the government as it ran before. Two, they didn't like the changes that Caesar was making, because Caesar's changes actually tended to benefit like everyday people versus the really wealthy. He saw the condition of Rome after the Punic Wars and how people with the loss of land really suffered with lack of jobs and things like that. And he was working to give lands back to small farmers who had lost them and things like that. And so in many ways, he was not popular to the Senate at all. But he was popular amongst the everyday people. They really loved his changes and reforms. So the assassination on the Ides of March, which is March 15th, the senators decided to all stab him at one time. This was a very important move on their part because no one senator wanted to take responsibility for Caesar's death. That would have been very dangerous for them and their family, because people did love Caesar. And so, and he did control the military, so they would become targets. So to lessen that piece of them becoming targets, they all decided together as one to stab him. And so they're like, well, you can't wipe out every rich family in Rome, and that's what you would have to do if you go after his murderer. Now, after Caesar, we're going to get an emperor. Like, this is where the transition is. I think, though, before we move to Octavian becoming an emperor, I think it is important to sort of point out some small differences between a dictator and an emperor. It can be gray. Like, if we look at history and find examples, you might find things that contradict what I'm saying, but I'm going to try to lay it out as simply as I can. A dictator is someone who rules through the military. Also, a dictator doesn't always have a clear avenue for transition of power. So a dictator doesn't necessarily pick the next person who's going to rule. It's not clear, because really a dictator ruled through his strength or her strength of the military. And, it kind of lends to, when they die, the same thing occurring, right? There being civil war and fighting and the next strongest person. An emperor, on the other hand, passes along power usually through bloodline. So when a dictator dies, it can cause war and strife because the next strongest person has to prove themselves to be so through the military. Versus an emperor, I mean, if they die and they have a 2-year-old kid, that 2-year-old kid becomes the ruler. Like, it's very clear. So there is a more of a peaceful transfer of power between an emperor versus a dictator. Also, differences between dictators and emperors that dictators tend to rule just like through their military, so all the laws and the regulations and everything tend to be really military based and military supported, and so people live their everyday lives kind of adjusting to like what the military parameters are that this ruler put forward. An emperor, on the other hand, tends to rule all aspects of people's lives. We're talking the emperor is the head of the military, but also the head of the religion, and head of the government. So they really have a bigger scope of what they rule over. And so because of that, in some ways, even like with a dictator, if they weaken in their ability to rule the military, they're probably going to lose their position. An emperor, even if they weaken in their rule of military, is running the government and the religion, and the people see that as the rightful person who should rule. It has nothing to do with being the strongest, but more like this is the person who's supposed to be here, and then their son and their child will be the person that's supposed to be here. There's just sort of a different agreement as to like how or why they're holding on power. So a dictator, why they're holding on power is because of the military, and an emperor, it's because this is just how the government works, and that's how it's expected. So what's interesting about, so I have a picture of Caesar here, who marks the end of the Republic, and then Marcus Aurelius, who marks the end of the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana, unfortunately, that Roman peace will not last forever for Rome. But so that piece of like transitioning power. So when Caesar's assassinated, he was grooming Octavian to rule, but in all reality, as a dictator, it's more like what military is more powerful. And so we have Octavian, who was the adopted son of Caesar, and then Mark Antony, who was a powerful military general. So they're basically going to fight it out and to see who will become the next dictator, the next ruler through the military. And Octavian is the one who's going to win this war and become the supreme ruler of Rome. What's kind of interesting is that when Octavian took over, historians kind of look at, really at first he didn't plan on being an emperor. I think he actually wanted to be more like a dictator. He planned on stepping down and passing his power along to the next powerful military person. But by the time he rules and we'll look at the things that he did, when he gets to the point or the age where he thinks about stepping down, the Republic didn't exist like it did anymore. And people were like, no, we need you to, Octavian, stay in, and we need you to keep the power, and then it'll end up being passed through his family bloodline, and then we have an empire. So Rome becomes an empire. So first of all, it's important to know that an empire means a group of peoples or countries that are controlled by one man. So again, you could go back and say, well, with our dictator, they were controlled by one man. But again, it's more of like a different way that the government is structured. Octavian here is going to rule over more than just the military and enforce things through the military. He's going to rule over people's religion, and he's going to rule over the government, like all aspects of people and these different countries in their lives with this emperorship. Now, Octavian takes on a title, Caesar Augustus. So Augustus meaning exalted one. Definitely when you're an emperor, you've got to prove that you are the best of the best. So that name definitely does that. But also taking on the title of Caesar, this is sort of showing the importance of Caesar as a dictator, as a ruler, and his important role in Rome. I do think, again, the fact that he's linking his relationship to Caesar, one could go back and say, wow, was Caesar just on the edge of becoming an emperor? Like, he is definitely a dictator, but would he have passed the power along to his son? Would he have taken further control over the empire, and did what it takes to be an emperor? Possibly, but we'll never know because he was assassinated on the Ides of March. Now, his rule is going to usher in a great time of peace, the Pax Romana. And that's because people are going to respect his rule. He's going to have the strength and the ability to hang on to power and to protect his borders. So Pax Romana means Roman peace. It's a period of relative peace between the Empire of Rome. It lasts for about 200 years. So we've got 200 BCE to about 180 BCE, which is Marcus Aurelius's rule. And during these 200 years, Rome holds on to its borders. It really doesn't have civil war, and it's not really threatened by outside forces. So the Germanic tribes that are living on the outside of the borders really don't have the power and ability to fight the Roman military. Now, remember I told you, an emperor takes over more than just the military. They take over many aspects of people's lives, or they just run everything. And so Augustus named himself the consul, the tribune, the high priest, the senator. So this is him taking over religion and the government. So he controls now military, government, and the religion. He definitely made sure that he controlled the military by making sure they swear allegiance to him and only him, not the generals that are running and supporting them. So he wanted to make sure that that line was no longer blurred as to who they should follow, their general or Augustus. Augustus is like, nope, it's me. So he has absolute power over everything. Under the rule of Augustus, things are, again, stable. He made the borders easy to defend, and he really didn't try to expand. He really just kind of kept what he had and looked to improve the inner workings of Rome. So what he did is instead of just ruling through the military and having the military enforce laws, he set up the city police. He also set up city fire brigades, and these are things to support and protect the citizens. He was also a ruler, so not all rulers do this. A lot of rulers through history tend to give jobs to their family members or their best friends, but Augustus was someone who really looked for the best person, the right person for the job, and not just giving jobs to his family. He created Rome's very first library, so there's that piece of the Pax Romana, improving education. He also wanted to make sure that people were being taxed fairly, that the rich people were paying their fare, and that it wasn't all on the backs of the middle or the poor, the middle class. And so what he did is he ordered a census to make sure that the proper amount of taxes were being charged. He also tried to end corruption by making sure the governors who were in charge of collecting these taxes were paid well enough that they wouldn't be as tempted to be corrupted, that they weren't always trying to steal or overcharge people a little bit to improve their wealth. He just sort of made them wealthy and said, okay, and now I trust you with this, which I'm sure he didn't fully trust them. I'm sure he definitely checked in, as any good ruler should, because the person that collects taxes can gain a lot of power. They have to keep their eye on that. Now, Augustus will rule for 41 years. At his death at age 75, his adopted son and son-in-law were asked to take over in a peaceful transition. And so his son-in-law, who was adopted as his son, to make sure that he had another strong ruler, that was the goal. It says, I feel like Dora here, where I stop and say, why do you think Augustus adopts his son-in-law? He adopted him because he felt like this person can continue ruling Rome in his vision. Not everyone is a natural born leader. And so I think he saw Tiberius as a natural born leader and someone can continue to strengthen and make Rome better. I mean, that in many ways was his goal. And so now we have a transition of power through family. I won't say bloodline yet because he adopted him, but eventually, bloodline will kind of reign supreme when it comes to passing along power in an empire. Now, Augustus on his deathbed, his last words were, "Behold, I found Rome of clay, and I leave her to you of marble." Your next assignment is going to be to explain what this quote means. So what I'd like you to do is you're going to take a separate Google Doc and you're going to answer the question, what does this quote mean? After you answer the question, you're going to make sure that you're going to go back through the slides and you're going to find evidence that supports why the quote means what you said it means. And you have to find 3 examples within the slides. There's a graphic organizer to walk you through it, and just reach out to your teacher. We are here to help. Thank you for listening and have a great day.